Hey there friends, what's going on? It's Codiak here, back for another Assassin's Creed Valhalla video, and today, yes, we are doing a tier list for the melee weapons in the game. And look, this is not a scripted video. I don't have bullet points, I have a big spreadsheet in front of me with all the information that I want to talk about, and after 100 plus hours of playing this game, I wanted to break down some of the high points, some of the low points, and talk about the weapons that I think will be valuable to you as a player. And what we're going to do is take this weapon type by weapon type, start with the one-handed axes, end with the Greatswords, and basically break down all of the high point items and all the low point items in each section. I think that's the best way to disseminate the information to you guys, and I just want to be very clear. This is 100% my opinion. I do think I have a decent head on my shoulders when it comes to weapons and understanding this game. Just because I played 100 hours doesn't mean squat, but I have completed the game, didn't have a lot of problems doing it, played it on the second hardest difficulty, so there's a little bit of experience there to back up kind of what we're going to talk about. So let's start with those one-handed axes. This is really the bread and butter in Valhalla, and a lot of people are pissed off that there are no one-handed swords, and I totally get that, but the one-handed axe is really taking the place of that kind of one-handed sword slot, if you will. They're an all-around decent weapon, decent speed, decent power, and yeah, they've got that one-handed chop attack in the offhand that's really, really powerful. It's a good all-around weapon, and there are some superstars here, specifically the Housecarl's axe. This increases your attack after each hit up to 10 times. That goes up to a plus 15 attack. Now that's just a really consistent performing weapon. That's a weapon you're going to see a lot of value out of long term. It's one of the easier items to get in the game. This is a no store item, and you could use the Housecarl's axe and it could take you all the way to the end game. You would never have to change up anything, and I know a lot of people don't like that about Assassin's Creed Valhalla, but me personally, if I find something good that works for me, I'm going to stick with it long term. So that's why it gets the S tier mark. And right below that in the A tier is Varen's axe. This is the same kind of thing, increases the speed after each hit up to 10 times, and that gives you up to plus 10 speed. Now that's good, but I would rather have more attack. The one-handed axes are already decently fast, so getting more speed is good, but having more attack, more power is kind of what I'm interested in, which is why it's not up there at the S tier as well. Now the other axes are okay. The Raider's axe is next on the list, increases your heavy damage after each light hit. That's a really great way to string moves together. The other two, the Furred axe and the Bear Claw axe, they're fine. I'm really not a huge fan of the when you're below a certain threshold, you gain some bonus effect that's on a lot of the items in the game. That's the Furred axe, increases your crit damage when low health. Even though it's below 50%, I still think that's just kind of silly. I don't want to be below 50% ever. I just feel like I'm not going to get that bonus a lot because I'm trying to stay above 50% because I don't want to get one shot. Especially at the harder difficulties, you're going to find that being below 50% is pretty much a death sentence. So I really don't like those effects, which is why it gets lower on the list. And the Bear Claw, which is the Season Pass Berserker item, is just kind of weird. You consume a ration, you gain temporary attack for 5 seconds. It's just, even with upgraded rations, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So in terms of one-handed axes, the Housecarl's axe gets the S tier, the Varen's axe gets that A tier, and the rest are okay, but those are the two that you definitely want to look out for. Alright, next up we have the Flails, and I'll be completely honest with you guys, I've never been a big fan of this weapon type. I'm so happy they put it in the game, don't get me wrong, it's really cool. A lot of games don't attempt to do Flails because they're really challenging to animate and to really get right. And there are some good ones here. Unfortunately, they're locked behind the store, and I hate that. I do not like that the best weapons in the game require you to spend real money to get. I think that's a huge party foul on Ubisoft's part, but anyways, that's what we're dealing with here. Frostrune, best flail in the game, hands down. Critical hits have a chance to restore an adrenaline slot. And just think about that. If you stack crit gear and you stack all of the crit runes, you are going to be able to get an insane amount of adrenaline, which means more maneuvers, more abilities, which means more dead bodies. There is no doubt in my mind this is an S tier weapon, and it just stinks because it's locked behind the Ubisoft store, and I don't like that. Now there are two other weapons I want to talk about, the Iron Star, which increases your attack after a heavy finisher, and the Soldier's Flail, which increases speed when you're close to full health. And I think this is a better route to go when you're talking about health-related items because you're most likely going to spend a lot of your time closer to full health than dead. That would be my guess, especially towards the mid to late game. You're going to find that you have a lot more rations, you can use them, you can stay topped off, and I think something like the Soldier's Flail is going to work a lot better for you in that scenario. The Iron Star is okay too, increases your attack after a heavy finisher. Doing a heavy finisher is not super common, but you can do it obviously. It's just not something that's going to constantly have an effect on your playstyle. Now the drawback is you're only getting a bonus duration of 3 seconds and you're only getting a plus 10 to attack, which isn't great, but it's decent. It's not a showstopper, but it'll get the job done. The other ones in the mix, Spitting Death, Hag's Bite, they're okay. I think they're more niche weapons than anything else. Hag's Bite is a store item or a Reddit shop item, and Spitting Death is a flashy item, gives you the chance to drop a firebomb on a heavy finisher hit, but honestly, it's really not that practical in major combat situations. Alright, next up I want to talk about hammers, and this is by far my favorite weapon type in the game. They are so versatile in the main hand and the offhand. There are a lot of great options for players, and yes, some of them are locked behind the Ubisoft store, but some of them are very easy to get as well. And I want to start with the Blacksmith's Hammer, which I think is the S tier hammer in the game. You might think it's Mjolnir, but it's actually the Blacksmith's Hammer. Heavy critical hits knock enemies to the ground, and that is incredibly potent when you're talking about dealing with a lot of enemies. Heavy critical hits, that's not hard to do. You stack crit and you use heavy attacks with your Blacksmith's Hammer, you are going to knock a ton of people to the ground, and that means they can't attack you back. And that's really the kicker here. That's why it gets the S tier, because it is that good at taking enemies out of the fight, which means you're not going to get hit. Now, I do think Mjolnir is another decent item. Every hit has a chance to do stun damage to all enemies around. Stun damage basically just ensures that you're going to get those stun finishers more often. It's a good weapon. It does take a lot of work to get. It's an end game item, and at that point, what do you need Mjolnir for if you've already beaten the game, if you're already at the end game? So I know there's a little weirdness around that, but it is a good weapon nonetheless. I also think the Yukon Visara is a decent hammer, increases your heavy damage when dodging. If you're a dodge player like me, you're not parrying as much, you want to look for items that are going to give you a bonus when you're avoiding enemies, and this one does that. You're going to get plus 20 to your heavy damage when you dodge for 2.5 seconds, and that is really great. You're going to be dodging left and right, so you don't have to worry about that duration so much, and that plus 20 is actually a decent number. Usually we see plus 10, plus 15, but a plus 20 to a bonus is a really, really good benefit to have, especially when you're talking about heavy damage. Basically, your hardest hitting attack, let's make it harder. That's why it gets that A tier, and that's why I think it's worth talking about. Now, the other two items in the hammer category, the Warhammer and the Mournful Cry, they're fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but they're just not as good as the other items in the mix here. And if you want to learn about every weapon, there are wikis, there are things like that. Just look them up, because I think if we went into every single item line by line, we'd be here for a very long time. And I don't think that's the point of this video. The point is to show you guys what I think are the best items in the game, the ones to look out for. Moving right along, let's talk about spears. This is kind of the new meta for everybody. People like to dual wield spears. There's a lot of flexibility there. They're very strong. You get that extra reach, and spears overall are just a really strong weapon in the game. I'm not sure if this is intended, if the Ubisoft team wanted spears to be the meta, but currently the dual spear thing is kind of what everybody is running, especially in the mid to late game. So if you're looking for the meta, if you're looking to be the best, check out dual spears, see if that's something that you like. And again, you can make anything work in this game. I don't want to make you think that you can only use dual spears, but just know that there are a lot of people on the internet and around the community that are using dual spears because it's kind of the it thing right now. In terms of S tier, I gotta talk about the Carolingian Pike. This is something that I've used for as long as I can remember. It got me through the early game, it got me through the mid game, I used it well into the late game. Dodging temporarily increases your ability damage. And look, that is me to a T. I would rather dodge than parry, and I loved using my abilities. So using the Carolingian Pike fit perfectly for my playstyle. I think it's going to fit a lot of playstyles of players that maybe don't enjoy parrying so much or just want to dodge more than they want to parry. This is easy to get. You can do it for free by using your Amazon Prime account. If you don't have an Amazon Prime account, you can make a trial one, get the reward. It's only active for a little bit longer, I think January 7th or something like that. So you're going to want to pick this up. The entire set of gear is fantastic and completely free if you have Amazon Prime. Steal your buddies, steal your parents, set up a trial account, just get the Pike because it's very, very good. Now I also want to talk about the Furred Spear, which is kind of in the same vein, increases your speed when dodging. Not as good as increasing your ability damage, but just as good, which is why it gets the A slot. Now the last one that kind of competes here is the Aridbi Hair, and this is a store item, increases your speed after each hit. I love these items that give you some benefit every time you hit an opponent. Granted, it doesn't give you a huge boost, whatever that boost may be. It only usually goes up to 10, sometimes 15, I believe, which is good, but it's a constant presence when you're in combat, and I think that's really important. There's also a lot of people that like Fafnir's Fang. This is one of the items that increases your critical chance when surrounded by 3 or more enemies, and you see this effect around all of the items in the game, increases something when surrounded by a certain amount of enemies. I personally don't like that effect. I think it's fine. It's a B tier item in my opinion, but I would rather focus on things that are going to help me with the hardest challenges in the game, the more elite enemies, not trying to deal with something when I'm being overwhelmed. I don't find the game to be very overwhelming. Even if they throw 4 or 5 enemies at me, I can always get into a position where I can take 1 or 2 out at a time. So I think the surrounded by 3 or more enemies thing is just kind of a gimmick. I don't really think it's valuable to players, which is why I suggest some of the other items in the game. All right, our next category here is the Seax. Yes, I'm going to keep saying it as the Seax because that's what they say in the game. Even if I'm wrong, I don't care. It's fine. Short little daggers, very fast, lower damage, but still incredibly potent in the main hand. And in the offhand, really cool attack with the offhand, kind of rushes forward, stab, 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 and then a pull back. Now, the one I want to talk about here is Suitengur's Claw. Increases your critical damage after each hit. This is fantastic. You can stack crit chance, you can stack crit damage, and you can really make the most out of this weapon. And this is going to work in the main hand and the offhand. A lot of the bonuses don't always work when you use them in the offhand. This is going to work in the offhand because of the way that the Seax kind of constantly attacks when used as an offhand weapon. It's a great choice for players that are looking for something with speed, a little bit of flexibility, and it's just one of those items that I think deserves that S tier. I think the Yingling Seax is also a good item, increases your melee damage after a dodge. As you guys know, I like that after dodge effect. I think that's going to have a lot of value for players. It gives you plus 15 to melee damage, and it's just straight melee damage. There's nothing wrong with that, it just increases your melee damage, and that is fantastic. Everything else in this category I just don't think really rises to that level. We've got the Huntooth, which increases critical chance when low health. I don't think that's great. The Hulafolk Blade, which increases back damage when dodging. I think back damage is fine, but I think the enemy AI is good enough that they don't expose their back for very long. We've got the Coppice. Every critical hit restores some health. This is a cool item. It's a cool effect, one we don't see on many items in the game, but I just don't think it really rises to the same level as some of the other effects. And of course, we have the Modronat Ceremonial Seax. This was a Yule Festival item, increases your critical chance after a kill. It's a decent item, doesn't quite reach that A tier in my opinion, but it is a good effect. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to get this item for much longer. The Yule Festival was a very short duration thing, and it was kind of a buggy mess. So some players may have gotten it, some players may have given up on the Yule Festival. This may show up in Reddit's store eventually. I would imagine they're not going to rip it out of the game, but you never know. All right, so let's look at this next category. This is the Dane axes, and it's very clear by the number of Dane axes in the game that they really wanted these to be a thing in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Honestly, I don't think there's much to talk about here. I think the Dane axes are slow. Yes, they do a decent amount of damage. I just don't think they're that great of items. Even when you wield them with the heavy dual wield spec, I just don't think they're that exciting. Yes, some people love them. I personally just don't think they're as good as the one-handed axes or the spears. I think they are outshadowed and outperformed by other weapon types in the game. And I'm sorry if you do like the Dane axes, I think this is just truth at this point. There are no showstoppers when it comes to this category. If I did have to point out one, it would be Bone Biter. Increases your stun after heavy hits up to 10 times. It does give you a bonus of up to plus 25 stun, and I think that is fantastic. Another decent Dane axe is the Dwarven Axe. This is part of the Fallen Warrior bundle on the store. Again, another store item. It's better than some of the other options that are out there. When you kill an enemy, you gain a little bit of speed. This stacks up to 3 times. If there was something that I think works for the Dane axe, it's definitely this idea. Increasing the speed is kind of essential to a slower two-handed weapon, and if you are looking to dual-wield Dane axes, it can be a bit of fun. Check out Bone Biter and check out the Dwarven Axe. But in terms of pretty much everything else, it's kind of falls flat. Doesn't really do much for me. A lot of the effects are things that we've talked about that I don't like being surrounded by more than 3 enemies, getting a bonus when dealing with lower health, and even Vordir's Bite, which is the Dane axe that you get for completing all of the legendary animal challenges. Heavy combo finishers have a chance to drop a poison cloud. It's just not that good for something that you worked really hard for, and I'm a little disappointed that there were not better options for the Dane axes. in the game, but this is what we're dealing with. This is what we've got to talk about. And yes, I don't think we need to belabor the point. Nothing great, nothing as a standout. Feel free to change my mind in the comments though. If you guys really like the Dane axes, try and change my mind. I am totally open to new ideas, so leave a comment below and let's talk about it. All right, our last true melee weapon category, let's talk about Greatswords, because there are some decent options here, specifically Surtur's Sword. This is one that is part of the new Hell bundle. It is a store item, but it is fantastic. Increase your attack when your weapon is ignited. And if you're in the mid or late game, igniting your weapon on fire using the ability is very easy. It's a very simple way to gain straight up attack on your weapon. I know it's a store item, but it is a unique effect that is just fantastic. Of course, we also have to talk about Excalibur here, the other legendary item in the game. Not bad. I think it's a C tier item. Heavy finishers and criticals blind all enemies around. I think that's fine, but I think the blind effect, however they coded it into the game, isn't great. It really doesn't do much in terms of deterring enemies from attacking you, and just overall, it's not a very good item, especially considering there are some better options out there. The Scimitar is another decent greatsword, increases your light damage after a heavy finisher. This lasts for 15 seconds and gives you that plus 15 to light damage, but it's really hard to string those moves together. I think it's a fine effect, but it does take a little bit of know-how and a little bit of kind of combat intuition to make this really work all the time. Greatswords as a whole are not fantastic, but I do think Surtur's Sword is something worth talking about. Now you may be thinking to yourself, what about the shields? There are light shields in the game, there are heavy shields in the game, and yes, you are right, you can wield them as weapons both in the main hand and the offhand, but the truth is the effects on the shields don't lend themselves to actually buffing the damage of the shields as weapons themselves. They are much more designed to be support items, to be offhand items that increase your main hand damage, which is why I don't think they really fit into the category of this video. That's not to say shields aren't good. I think light shields are fantastic. I think heavy shields are a little bit overdone, but if you like using a shield, if you like a more defensive playstyle, there is definitely shields for you out there. There are so many in the game, and they're really good. There are some really decent shields that Ubisoft have put into the game. A lot of them are not behind the store wall, so I think shields are fine. I just don't think they fit quite in this video. In terms of bows, we'll get there. We're probably going to do another video talking about bows specifically, since we're kind of talking about apples and oranges at this point, but I wanted to be clear and explain why shields and bows were not part of this video. Now, like I said, guys, this list is just my base set of opinions on all of the items in the game. You may have different feelings about some of the items that we talked about. You may think that I'm spot on. It doesn't matter. It's an opinion video. That's the whole point of these types of videos. If you guys did enjoy this, and if you want more tier list type videos in the future, please let us know in the comment section below. And of course, hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want more Assassin's Creed Valhalla content in your feed. My name is Codiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.